But I looked at my calendar real quick and I said, well, I know someone that can do that. And so I'm always happy to do that, especially for Wally, and I hope he has a great birthday. Wally, I know you'll watch this video, and so it's just we want to tell you that there must be 75 people here today. Right, David?
Everyone heard Charlie.
I don't know how the word got out, Wally. I'm sure they'll be back next Sunday. And nobody tell now exactly, because I just rounded it off at 75. So, anyway, I don't know if you guys have enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed teaching this great story, the book of Ruth. But I always think that I know a certain passage or a certain book well because I've studied it many times. I've heard it taught many times by people who know a lot more about the scripture than I do. But as we went through this study, I just have been amazed at how God opens up in his miraculous book new things. And this is such a great story. And even in secular literature, Ruth is known as one of the greatest short stories ever written. But of course we know it as being inspired, inerrant Word of God. And so that makes it even better. So we're going to look at Ruth chapter 2 and starting down at verse 17 in just a moment. And finish up chapter 2. But in the dark days of the Revolutionary War, right after our country had gone through gaining its independence, the founding fathers were starting to look at one another and say, what now? And after about 10 years, they were still asking the question, what's next? What now? And so they had a meeting in Philadelphia, and with the delegates all gathered there, and Benjamin Franklin, 81 years old at that time, got up and said this, I quote, "What do we do now?" He said, "Turn to God. Turn back to God. Have we now forgotten that powerful friend? Or do we now imagine we no longer need his assistance? The longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid?" Wise words. I think Franklin was right when he answered the question, what now? He said, turn to God. God again.
Would that we had leaders like that today.
Yeah.
Yes. Amen. But I found that when I read that story, I thought about Ruth and Naomi. They are in the time of what now? They have been emptied of everything. They have made their way back to the fields of Bethlehem from Moab. And so we find them in chapter 2 asking that question. It wasn't just a geographical move. It was actually a move from outside of God's will to inside of God's will. And so after they arrive, they get there, and we remember the words of Naomi. When she came into town, they said, "Hey, Naomi's back. She's been gone, over 10 years, and what's going on? She don't call me Naomi, pleasant. Call me what? Mara, which means bitter. She's bitter." And I wondered as she sat there in the evening with Ruth, if they said, "What now? What's going to happen to us now?" When I started teaching the book of Ruth a few weeks ago, I said there's many different themes in this book. And I won't go over them all, but I look back and just in chapter 1 you covered so many of them. But you could say, well, the providence of God is definitely a theme in the book of Ruth. Conversion is a theme, because Ruth is converted as she takes Naomi's God, Jehovah God, to be her God. There's the theme of choices. I think chapter 1 is all about choices. The choice that Elimelech made, the choice then later on that Naomi made to come back, the choice that Ruth made to go with her, the choice that Orpah made to go back to Moab. So it's a book of choices. We will continue to see that. It's a book of redemption. See a little of that this morning. This starts at that, just a peek at that this morning. But then it's a book primarily, I think, and I think I skipped this a lot when I was first studying the book. It's a book about God's kindness. And the big idea today that we're introduced to in chapter 2 is the fact that the Lord cares for his people through his people. God's kindness is distributed through his people. Now, that does not mean that God doesn't intervene directly sometimes, as he chooses. In chapter 1, verse 6, you remember that God decided the famine's over, and I'm going to bless Israel again, and I'm going to bring the harvest back again. So God directly intervened. It wasn't any person intervening there to make it happen and showing God's kindness. He said, okay, the time's over for the famine. I'm going to bring it back. He directly intervened. The other place he directly intervened, which I found as I was studying this week and looking for this, it's only one other place that he showed that he directly intervened, and that's in chapter 4, verse 13. It says, so Boaz took Ruth into his home. Oh, I'm giving away the end of the story. So if you don't know, I'm sorry. This is spoiler alert. All right? So Boaz took Ruth into his home, and she became his wife. When he slept with her, what does it say? The Lord enabled her to become pregnant. And she gave birth to a son. And that son was who? Remember? It's one of those guys. I know it's one of those guys. Obed. Maybe it was Obed. Yeah. And Obed gave birth later on to another guy. Well, do you remember what his name might be? Jesse. And Jesse gave birth to another guy, and his name was what? David. And years and years and years and years later, David was in the line of Jesus Christ. And so God enabled this birth by direct intervention to make this story happen. So let's read Ruth Ruth 2, verse 17. So Ruth gathered barley there all day. If you remember from last week, she's been in the fields of Boaz. And when she beat out the grain that evening, it filled an entire basket, or an ephah. Do you know that people, commentators, go crazy about trying to describe how much an ephah is? Who cares? You know, I was reading this and I kept reading over, and I said, well, I'm going to read another commentary about this. And then I want to read another. They had 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pages on how much an ephah is. And none of them agree. So, it's a lot. I was convinced that it was a lot. It could be anywhere, from what I read, it could be anywhere from 15 to 30 pounds, and that it would last for these two ladies for about at least a week worth of food. All right, so it's a bunch. Anyway, don't go read the commentaries about it because it'll drive you crazy. All right. So it goes on. It says in verse 18, she carried it back into town and showed it to her mother-in-law. Ruth also gave her the roasted grain that was left over from her meal. Remember, she had a meal with Boaz and with the harvesters, and he said, give her a to-go bucket. All right. So she had a to-go basket. Yeah, and so it was. So she's bringing home. I guess you'd call this not a door dash, just be a harvest dash. You know, she'd bring it in. All right, so verse 19. Where did you gather all this grain today, Naomi said, where did you work? May the Lord bless the one who helped you. So Ruth told her brother-in-law about the man in whose field she had worked. She said, the man I worked with today is named Boaz. May the Lord bless him, Naomi told her daughter-in-law. He is showing his kindness. All right, that's the word you circled. That's the word you remember. That's going to be the thing. Showing his kindness is hesed, is the Hebrew word, to us as well as to your dead husband. That man is one of our closest relatives. You know, I think I had all this up here. You know, oh, yeah, there you go. Where do you work? So we just get caught up here. Here we go. May the Lord bless him. He's showing his kindness to us as well as to your dead husband. That man's one of our closest relatives. Then verse 21. Then Ruth said, what's more, Boaz even told me to come back and stay with his harvest until the entire harvest is completed, you know, the wheat and the barley harvest. Good, Naomi exclaimed. Do as he said, my daughter. Stay with these young women right through the whole harvest. You might be harassed in other fields, but you'll be safe with him. So Ruth worked alongside the women, and I lost the last part of it. So that's too bad. Verse 23 says that. The rest of verse 23 says, I'll just read it from the Bible. It's a good place to read it from. It says, then she continued working with them throughout the wheat harvest and early summer, and all the while she lived with her mother-in-law. All right. So there's our text today. Here's a good outline. It makes it simple. I like simple outlines. So you got the first two verses. That's not through 28. That's through 18. I made several errors in this. But Ruth shares, verse 17, 18. Naomi recovers, verse 19 and 20. And then Boaz provides and protects. And what we'll do is pull out the kindness in each one of those. I'm going to do that in a little bit different way today. But let me start off with, our theme is the word is around kindness. So let's look at the Hebrew word hesed. It means literally translates steadfast love and faithfulness. It's used 250 times in the Old Testament. It's used 128 times just in Psalms. And it's used in so many ways when you're seeing God's loving kindness and mercy and tenderness. That's what he's talking about when God's kindness, attribute of God. And so I kept looking at definitions and how it's used. It's used as faithful love in action. It's used as loyalty to covenant. It's used as persistent and additional tenderness and unconditional tenderness, kindness, and mercy. And on and on and on. And I won't go through all the different ones. But this word is used in the book of Ruth when Naomi praises the kindness when Naomi praises the kindness of Ruth in chapter of Ruth and Orpah, chapter 1, verse 8. And then God and Boaz both praise for the kindness for Naomi in chapter 2 and verse 20. And then Ruth is praised for her kindness in chapter 3, verse 10. So it's on and on and on and on. Now, let's talk about Ruth's shares. And if you will, I think it's important for us in this great book to get into the scene of really what happened. It's hard. This was 3,000 years ago. We don't have anything like this today. So can you just sort of think with me for a second as we try to enter into this scene, and we'll let the characters talk through it. So here's how it plays out in my mind. Let's begin Ruth speaking. Man, what a day this has been. I've been working hard all day, but what a blessing. Boaz, this man who owned this land, has been so very gracious to me. I just can't believe my good fortune. He has given me exclusive rights to glean from this field. I don't have to go looking to beg to glean anywhere else. And since I'm a foreigner, a hated Moabite, it's wonderful. I don't have to go anywhere else. And Boaz is protecting me because I can see this is a dangerous time in Israel. Because every man is doing what is right in their own eyes. He's given me water to drink. He's a believer in Jehovah, as I have become, and has asked Jehovah to bless me. Then when it was time to stop and eat, Boaz invited me to eat with his harvesters. He gave me some roasted grain to eat. I think I'll put them in a doggy bag for later. Then I learned that I would get even more. I got to go right into the main field and harvest the barley grains. And if that wasn't enough, the young men are dropping some of the heads of the barley from bundles on purpose so that I can have them. So I beat out the grain this evening. It filled an entire basket, an ephah, which is at least 20 pounds more in this bag. Wait until Naomi sees this. And then I think about Naomi. I think Naomi might have been at home, and I think she was thinking this. As I sat at home this evening, I think about what a terrible state I'm in. Yes, I'm bitter. I've lost everything. No one cares except Ruth, my sweet daughter. I'm at the end of my rope. There's nothing I can do. God has forsaken me. I'm worried sick about Ruth. I wonder where she is. She must be miserable, working so hard all day, bending over all day, picking up just scraps, having to find work like the lowliest of all people, just picking up leftovers. How shameful she must feel. She's so vulnerable, and she's hated because she's a foreigner, a Moabitess, and she's beautiful, and she's a widow. Has she been attacked today? Everyone is doing whatever is right in their own eyes. Will Ruth walk through that door? Suddenly I hear something. It has to be Ruth. Look at what she has. Why, it's enough to feed both of us for days. And she has some left over from a meal. How in the world did this? 25 to 30 pounds of barley, massive amount to glean, a heavy weight to carry, and I have a bag that I had all fashioned up. A man in my life group put a whole bag together for me. I couldn't carry it over from my classroom, so y'all don't get to see it. But maybe I can carry it from my class from one side of the room to the other. What do we learn? Well, guess what? A dramatic reversal of fortune has taken place, right? So Naomi left Bethlehem full, and she returned empty. Ruth went out empty, but now she's returning full. Things are changing. So we start to see that God is revealing himself to Ruth. And now his loving kindness is going to trickle down. And I think, because I've read the end of the story too, I think Naomi is going to turn from Mara, bitter, back to pleasant, because God is going to provide. So, in verses 19 through 20, we see Naomi recovers. So let's think of what they might have been saying. Naomi goes, Ruth, where'd you get all this grain? Where did you work? I don't know where you got it, but I pray the Lord will bless this person who helped you. You must tell me about this person who's been so gracious to you. Ruth said, well, I was working in the fields with a man named Boaz. He was very kind to me. He gave me extra, told me I didn't have to work anywhere else. He let me have dinner with all his men who were paid to harvest his fields. They looked at me harshly. I think they were jealous. They just couldn't believe a woman, a widow, a foreigner, got to sit at the table. And then to top it all off, they were told to let me have even more, that I could actually go into the field and harvest with the others. They even had to drop some for me on purpose. Naomi, you're not going to believe this. And then Boaz protected me. No one even dared look at me. He must have been sent by our God. I just had to come home and share this with you. Even this bag did not seem heavy. Pretend you're seeing a bag right now, okay? The El Shaddai that you told me about must be looking out for us and protecting us. Naomi says, oh, God bless Boaz and praise our God. Yes, I believe that Shaddai, the God who provides and satisfies, has looked on our terrible situation and brought us relief. He has chosen to send you to Boaz's field so we could have food. It must be Jehovah's plan, because best of all, Boaz is one of our family redeemers. You know, Ruth, I haven't felt blessed by anyone for a long time. My husband died. My 2 sons died. I had to return home empty. You came with me, but I have been so bitter. But I believe something is happening. I believe God, Jehovah God, is still there. And maybe He's interested in me. And Boaz is showing this kindness to us, as well as your dead husband. What is this all about? Despite her bitterness and everything, her coldness and her emptiness, she receives the loyal promise, faithfulness of Ruth, who was sharing the blessing that came to her through Boaz. So now she's starting to see that the goodness of God is changing everything. In an instant, her bitterness turns to blessing. In her deep depression and bitterness, she begins to experience the covenant, promised, committed kindness of God. The Lord says, okay, I'm going to turn your bitterness into gratitude. I'm going to turn your unbelief into faith. And I'm going to turn your despair into hope, Naomi. The Lord resurrects the life of Naomi by channeling His provision through Boaz. Now, let me take a side step here for just a second. Doesn't mean that Naomi has forgotten her sorrow. As a matter of fact, as you read on the end of the chapter, you would say that they arrived and it says, and all the while she lived with her mother-in-law. So the harvest, there's still months and months and months before anything happens. Like we get to read next week. Next week is an exciting story. It's the 3,000-year-old version of The Bachelor. Okay, that's a big one, Wally. You're going to have to do that one, all right? But right now, she's feeling her sorrow even as she expressed her hope. I read a story this week from Carolyn James, who wrote about a guy named Wolterstorff. His son died. He said this, she said this about him. The death of his son drew Wolterstorff limping into a deeper, almost frightening connection with God. The world has a hole in it now, he sorrowed. I shall look at the world through tears. Perhaps I shall see things that dry-eyed I could not see. G.K. Chesterton wrote this about hope. Hope means hoping when things are hopeless, or there's no virtue at all. As long as matters are really hopeful, hope is just mere flattery or platitude. It's when everything is hopeless that hope begins to be a strength. So let me remind you good folks about something that I think the Lord's trying to teach me from this book. Is that and again, this is sort of a side step,
is that we shouldn't shy away from helping others because we don't know what to do. Let me give you a case in point. The story of Job. So Job's sitting here in his ash heap, and he's lost everything. None of us could ever compare the losses that we have gone through with the losses that Job went through, and at no fault of his own. So he's going through this difficult trial, and he's sitting there, and 3 friends show up. Now, these 3 friends show up, and they start out doing exactly what they should do. They sit around him in the heap of ashes. They just sit around him, and for 7 days, it said they just sat there in silence and mourned with him. Now, after the 7 days, they really started messing it up. They started saying, hey, this is because of your sin, and this is what you need to do, and this is what you need to do. They should have just shut up after 7 days, right? But what did the kindness of God look? Sometimes it's just being there is showing the loving kindness of God. I cannot remember how many times that's been true in my life. I got a call one Saturday night. It'll be 7 years. Be 7 years tomorrow, as a matter of fact. I got a call Saturday night, late Saturday night, and my younger brother's 3. He was 3 years older than me, and he was a pastor in Florida, and he was sitting there on Saturday night preparing for his message, bent his head over, and died. Had a massive heart attack and died. I got the call late Saturday night. My wife and I were planning on leaving the next morning, going overseas for a long vacation. And it was my only brother, and it just turned my whole heart around. And I honestly, I was just devastated. And so I was supposed to teach the next morning. We were leaving in the evening. And so I was supposed to teach my class the next morning. So I called my group pastor, whose job I now have. I called Tommy Armstrong, and I said, Tommy, my brother just died. I don't know if I'm going to be able to teach tomorrow or not. He said, understand, I got it, take care of it. And early the next morning, I said, this is ridiculous. I know where Russell is. And so I went and taught, and I went home. And all of a sudden, the knock came on the door, and I looked, and there was Tommy and Mary standing outside my door at home. And I opened the door, and they just came in. And you know what he said? I just want to sit with you.
Tom.
And I just want to be with you. That's all I needed. I didn't need him to say that Russell's in heaven. I knew that. I didn't need to say that, that God will comfort you over time. I know that. But God said, I'm going to send Tommy and Mary by your house. Now Tommy's with him, and they're talking about golf or something together. Yeah. And he said, we're just going to sit here. He said, you just need someone that loves you to sit here and be with you. And that was God's kindness being expressed to me. So I would urge you, if for Naomi, it was and Ruth, it was a sack of grain, right? Just here's have this sack of grain. And it was Boaz saying, hey, you get to go in there and pick up with everybody else. And you know what? They're going to leave a little extra for you. And oh yeah, by the end of the meal, I'm going to give you a little. That's what God's kindness was seen, how it was seen, and how it was experienced in Ruth's life and in Naomi's life. And so maybe in our life, maybe it's just the tap on the shoulder. Say, I'm thinking about you. I love you. Maybe it's that just I'm going to send a text to Joe or to Susie or to Bill today and say, hey man, just thinking about you today. Love you. God bless you. Maybe it's saying, well, so-and-so's in the hospital. I think I'm gonna take them some flowers. I don't know what to say. I'm not very good at hospital visits, but you know what? I can take them some flowers and just say, they may not even let me in the door. In the life of COVID, it's very common you don't get in the door. I mean, to get in the door of the hospital today, I've become everybody's brother, father, mother, I mean, just about everything to get in. And I'm on the pastoral care team, so I still can't get in sometimes. But you know what? Many times it's just to come in, they go, who are you? I said, I'm just here to pray with you. That's all you need to say. And you pray with them and you leave, and God's kindness is demonstrated to them just like it was in the story of Ruth. Okay, the last section. I know you're wondering if this train has a caboose, but it does, okay? Boaz now is going to show kindness by providing and protecting in the last few verses. So let me just tell you what I think they may have been saying in the last few verses. Ruth says, guess what? This great guy Boaz even told me to come back and stay with his harvesters until the end of the barley and wheat harvest. So I have enough work that will keep us and sustain us for at least the next 2 to 3 months. And if it's anything like today, I'll gather enough to keep us eating all the way till the next harvest. Little does she know. Naomi goes, look, it's a good idea. Stay with them, Ruth, through the whole harvest. I believe you will be safe with him. I believe there may be a future for us after all. Ruth says, okay, Naomi, I'm so excited that you agree. I'll go back and keep on working right through both harvests. But don't worry, I'm not leaving you. I'm going to continue to live with you and share whatever Boaz gives me. I believe in the plan that Jehovah God has for us. And he will show it through his goodness and kindness. We're introduced to the guardian redeemer, the kinsman redeemer, the family redeemer. The word used here in the Hebrew is the word Go'al, G-O-E-L. I don't know if I have that up there. I don't. This is, Boaz is the kinsman redeemer. You've heard this before. Let me just refresh your memory about what that means. The role actually comes from Leviticus 25. If you want to read up on the kinsman redeemer, just go to Leviticus 25. It tells the whole story of what a kinsman redeemer is, or a family redeemer. It's a near relative. A man dies, and his widow is childless, and so the relative has the opportunity to do a lot of different things. Sometimes it's to keep the land in the family. Sometimes it's to buy back the family from slavery. And sometimes it's to avenge the murder of a relative. That sort of changed the way our laws happen today, wouldn't it? Pay back the debt of a deceased relative. Boy, there's sometimes I'm glad that that's not true anymore. I don't know about you, but I got some family members that are gone that, man, I couldn't cover their debt if I had to. And then to carry on the family name and legacy, this is the Levirate law, where if a man dies and he has a brother, the brother can marry the wife, have children, carry on the name and the legacy of the family. So that's what the kinsman redeemer is. It has to be a kinsman, a family member, and then there is a process of redemption. Prior to Leviticus 25, now listen to this, the work of a Go'al is only associated with God. There is no person mentioned as a redeemer other than God prior to Leviticus chapter 25. So that when people acted as kinsman redeemer, this is where God's leading them. Said, okay, now I'm going to put this in place. You've seen how I've been a redeemer. Now I'm going to transfer this to you so they could actually reflect the image and character of God in redeeming their family. There's so many good things about this that, I mean, this is at least another 2 hours of good stuff, so I hope you're all ready to go. How about 8 minutes? Interestingly, and this is something I didn't know, I looked at this. The kinsman redeemer is such an important role. Leviticus 25 tells you all about it. You and I have heard about it. We've grown up in church. I just talked to you about this one. Jesus came to the spiritually destitute, those enslaved to sin, helpless, at considerable cost to himself, and frees the captive. Just like Boaz does. So Jesus was not the first redeemer from Bethlehem, but he was the greatest redeemer from Bethlehem. There's too much, I can't go into all of it. But let me also remind you, you see this in the following weeks. It was sheer grace, though, that Boaz decided to take on this massive responsibility. Now, I think the deal with Ruth, marrying Ruth, maybe that wasn't so hard. That was a pretty good deal, I think. But that also meant all these other things he had the opportunity to redeem. But he didn't have to. He was under no law that he had to redeem that because there was a kinsman that was more near than he was. He was related to Elimelech, and there were others, and he didn't have to do this, but he said, by grace, just like our Redeemer said, we're destitute, and there's only one way. And he said, I'll be your Redeemer. Great story. Okay, let me just finish it up. Or as Pastor Josh says, let me land the plane. I always like to say that. Of course, he starts landing the plane like people who circle the airport sometimes, circle landing the plane. I noticed I was listening to Pastor Josh, you'll hear him today, last Sunday, and you probably heard him say this, okay, let me land the plane right here. 10 minutes later, it's time to land the plane. I said, he hadn't run out of fuel yet. It's good. So let me land the plane. You become and I become useful to God in acts of kindness. Why? So that they will experience the loving kindness of God. The learning for me here is kindness, God's kindness, not just mere acts of helping a lady across the street. You notice I didn't say old lady anymore. Because I'm an old man, so I don't say that anymore. Kindness is our light in a dark world. And I don't participate on it for a number of reasons, but my wife does, and social media, and she'll show me this, and she does it to keep up with people that we love. But then I have to look and see what a dark, dark, unkind world we're surrounded by. And as you will hear Mike Bro say in just a moment, we are that light that really shines in that dark world. Because when people see that great kindness of God, the chesed of God, the loving kindness of God, it's a light in a dark world. And that's what turned Naomi around. From bitter, she's headed back toward pleasant. Next week, I know you'll get to study it and you'll hear a good lesson on it, but I already started preparing it because next week is the planning and the conniving and the okay, here's the opportunity, Ruth. Let's get this going here. I see an opportunity, and she may take things in her own hands just a little bit, but Ruth sort of straightens it out. But that's for the teachers next time, all right? Let's pray. Father, thank you for this great book to study.